Eric Shaw used to have it all. A beautiful wife, recognition in Hollywood, and respect. Now, his marriage is in shambles, his career is gone, and he can barely keep himself afloat as a freelance videographer. While presenting a video for a family at a funeral, a woman notices Shaw's sharp eye and attention to detail, and hires him to create a documentary about her dying father-in-law, the reclusive billionaire Campbell Bradford. The only clue to start looking is a bottle of mineral water that Bradford had kept since childhood. Oddly enough, no matter where the bottle was kept, it remained absolutely frigid. Shaw soon finds himself over his head as he starts seeing visions of the past, and an old presence draws him into a mystery he's not prepared to solve. Who was Campbell Bradford, and why is the mineral water always so cold? This book was not only my first foray into author Michael Corrida's work, but the first audiobook I listened to all the way through. The book was published in 2010. It starts off slow, establishing the protagonist, his backstory, and just getting the plot started over several chapters, but once it gets going, it's surprisingly difficult to turn away from. A large reason for that was the excellent narration by Robert Petkoff. It also helps that the book was set in a small town with a rich history. The book's exploration of that history adds substantially to the story as a whole and ties everything together in a nicely bundled, enjoyable package. As this is a mystery novel, I won't go into too much detail on the plot, but the twists and turns are handled nicely. Corrida wisely didn't linger on obvious clues. To paint an example not from the book, if Shaw met a person with a faded scar on his hand, then had a vision of a teenager with a matching scar, he would clearly deduce that they were the same person. Other clues are otherwise very broad and can take a while to fully develop, but it all makes sense in the end. If you pay attention, you can solve the mystery early, but the characters alone make the story worth it. Much of the reason I was so drawn to this book early was just how real Eric Shaw felt as a person. He was fleshed out good and early in a few slow chapters, but in terms of character development, the payoff was worth it. Shaw is a very flawed person, impatient with his wife, very prideful, and he often carries on with his wounded ego and self-loathing. It's this stubborn pride that got him to get drunk on his first night of investigating and take a drink from the freezing mineral water bottle. Soon after, Shaw gets terrible migraines that are only cured by drinking more mineral water. However, the payoff is that Shaw gets to peek into the past and witness visions of Campbell Bradford at his prime. But his chemical dependence gets progressively worse the longer the book goes on, and who knows what effects Shaw will suffer if he doesn't solve the mystery of the water in time. Kellen Cage is one of the first people that Shaw runs into in town. A basketball player turned academic, Cage is doing his own research on Campbell Bradford. Curiously, his search sent him to a completely different person than the man Shaw is looking for, one who had died a long time ago. Cage uses his knowledge of the town's history to help Shaw and to bounce ideas off of. More importantly, Cage becomes vital for Shaw as a close confidant and ally in solving the mystery. The pair work together well, kind of like two hapless detectives who aren't entirely sure what they're doing, but they mesh well. Also in town is Anne McKinney. She's a lovely woman, 86 years old, and an experienced storm watcher. She's also one of the only people in town who remembers the old mineral water plant from decades past. She dotes on Shaw when she hears about the migraines and visions that he has to endure, and is eager to help. She's very sweet and is the kind of person you'd love to have as a grandmother, but not everyone in town is helpful or even pleasant. Josiah Bradford is a descendant of Campbell, and he's your basic poor, angry redneck with a touch of racism. Josiah is a selfish, devious man, and when he hears that Shaw is asking about his family history, Josiah decides that he's owed a profit. He spends much of the story hounding Shaw one way or another, trying to track him or figure out what Shaw wants and how to get money out of him. He gets increasingly desperate and violent as the story moves along, in part because as Shaw's visions get worse, Josiah starts to see similar events. An old voice talks to him and even starts to take over his mind. Now, like I said, a lot of the strength of this story came from the excellent narration. Robert Petkoff gives an all-star performance, switching between multiple characters and giving each delivery a distinct but realistic voice. Even without an introduction, you can immediately tell who he's playing from his tone alone. He's also backed by a simple but effective musical track and sound effects. The audiobook uses the effects sparingly, but they heighten the mood whenever they're used. You get sounds like water dripping, wind blowing, and there's a soft dirge played on a violin that sets the scene all on its own. Frankly, the audiobook experience is worth it enough that I might prefer it over the actual book. Now, Corrida's writing style feels a little rough in a few places, and he overall uses a slow pace, but the experience is still very enjoyable. He uses some repetition in his prose and dialogue, not overly so, and he's able to emphasize the emotion of his characters and paints a fresh canvas for his world. The town is also greatly detailed, especially choice locations like the hotel Eric visits, which is apparently based on a real landmark called the West Baden Springs Hotel. There's also a supernatural tinge about the valley the story is set in, but it's mostly kept to the background. There are plenty of ghost stories to listen to, but are they real, or are they just vivid hallucinations from Shaw? The town has a richly detailed history, and there's a mysterious atmosphere at all times. Half the fun is hearing the surroundings get described and picturing yourself in town alongside the characters. Overall, So Cold the River is pretty good, but the audiobook pushes it up to a page-turner, well worth the read. Or listen, in this case. The characters are fantastic, the twists in the story will keep you engaged, and this is one of the most strongly assembled audiobooks that I've ever encountered. Buy the book or download it on Audible, not a sponsor yet. It's worth checking out. So, have you read the book? What did you think? If not, do you want to read it now? Whatever your thoughts, comment below and stay tuned for more.